questions. Actually, right. Yes, I know there were some questions last time. So yeah, so let's, if anybody has questions, as you just said, Avi, yeah, they can ask, I guess, in the middle of the shiur. In addition, let me, and I will reserve some time at the end. We're gonna finish it a little early today. We don't have too much left till the end of the sugya, so that we should be finishing early. So we definitely will have time for questions. Let me ask you, Avi, do you have the ability to share the map of the first sugya on your side? Because from a technical perspective, I am using only one screen today as opposed to three, so it would be easier. But if you can't, I'll do it on my side.
I should be able to. I'll try get it up now.
All right. And while you're doing that, let me just review where we're at. So we're about to finish this is so it's called the sugya mishuleshet, which means it's a three-part sugya. We saw that each one of the three parts in turn had three parts. It doesn't always have to be like that. For example, sometimes you can have a sugya kefula mishuleshet or mishuleshet kefula. So there's different structural formats for the sugyot. In part, and let me know when it's up, because I'm not looking, Avi, when you have the map up, let me know so that I'm aware that we proceed. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue talking. So part one of and the purpose of the sugya really was to understand the very beginning of the Mishnah. What I'm going to do with you at the end of this class is I am going to read to you the Perusha Mishnayot of the Harambam, and you'll see how well the words of Harambam mirror not just the sugya as I've explained it, but also mirror the particular girsa that I chose last week. And I want to say a word about that girsa now, because I know there was a question about the girsa, and people said, well, we can explain the other girsa this way or that way, and that's fine. I think I mentioned in the class that I was a little confused by the other girsa, but I didn't discount or eliminate the possibility that there's different explanations. So when we read the Rambam in the Perusha Mishnayot, you'll actually see how his words are very carefully crafted to match the Girsa that I brought to your attention. Okay, that's important. But let's just summarize where we're at. We had the textual problem in the Mishnah. We had the approach offered by Rabbi Abu, and the approach offered by Rabbi Abu was fine, but it wasn't perfect. It wasn't without problems. The approach offered by Rabbi Abu, as studied in the yeshiva of Fum Bedita, Baraba, had certain textual issues to it. And worse yet, not only did it have textual issues, but it ignored the interpretation given by the great Shemuel. So Shemuel, who was a Talmud of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, was present, although a young Talmud, a very young Talmud, I should say, but he was certainly present during the editing of the Mishnayot. He had a comment on this Mishnah, and or he didn't have a direct comment, but apparently he addressed the textual difficulty in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Abu was simply unaware of that. Why was he unaware of that? Well, at the end of this class, I will perhaps address that as well. I hope I make a note to address that. So Rabbi offers a different approach to the Mishnah. The different approach that Rabbi offers is not an approach that has legal consequences, but it has interpretive consequences. So that's where we're at. And basically, the interpretation of Rabbi is the interpretation that's ultimately accepted. And because it's the interpretation that's ultimately accepted, you'll see again how Rambam mirrors that interpretation. Let's now look. Go ahead. Yeah.
Looking to share it now?
Yes, sir. Please. That would be great. All right. And I am now going to be looking at something else, but you can go to part 3, Avi. Go to part 3 of the map. And part 3 is the statement of Rabaha Bere de Rab Ika. Let me explain to you what's happening here. Rav Aha Bered Ravika is also in Yeshivat Fom Bedita. He's one generation later. So meaning the discussion of this Mishnah ended during the generation of Rava. We saw that discussion, and that seemed to finalize the matter. But then the next generation, when Rava was Rosh Yeshiva, we said the Yeshiva was in Fom Bedita. The next generation was Rav Papa. Rav Papa was the Rosh Yeshiva. A colleague of Rav Papa is Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika. And Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika was not the Rosh Yeshiva, but he makes the following statement. I'm going to read the statement, and then I'm going to explain it, and then I will comment upon it. So just so you know where we're at. So this is a further discussion. This is a further element. Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika Amar Midde Oraita Had Name Kasher Shene'emar Besedek Tishpot Amitecha. Okay, Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika, he makes the following statement, and it is as follows. From the perspective of biblical law, it is sufficient to have a single dayan adjudicating these matters. And where do I learn this from, or where can this be gleaned from? Besedek tishpot amitecha. So it says besedek tishpot amitecha, and that's using the singular form. And from here, Rav Aha, rather, I don't want to say from here, but rather Rav Aha is illustrating his point, again, using the text in the Torah as a rhetorical tool to express the halacha, which is mideoraita had nameh kasher. Okay, I want to point out certain difficulties with this statement. This is a very dramatic statement. Until now, we've had several generations of Emoraim, starting with Rabbi Abu in Caesarea, Talmud of Rabbi Yohanan, second generation of Emoraim going to Rava from Bedita or Mechoza, fourth generation of Emoraim, and there is a consensus, and the consensus is as follows. You need to have 3 dayanim in Dine Mamonot. The issue was whether they have to be mumhin or they don't have to be mumhin, but 3 dayanim as a minimum was a consensus. And comes Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika, and he makes this dramatic statement: Mideoraita had nameh kasher. So, first of all, he's not the Rosh Yeshiva. Now, obviously, the Rosh Yeshiva allowed this discussion to take place because this is a formal statement that's made in the Yeshiva. And as I said, I would venture to guess, or the way the Yeshiva worked is the Rosh Yeshiva allowed discussions to take place on subjects that the Rosh Yeshiva himself approved of, which is to say that the statement wouldn't be made in the Yeshiva, wouldn't be recorded in the Talmud as a formal statement if it wasn't for the fact that the Rosh Yeshiva accepted it. So while it's a dramatic statement, it's something that was accepted. So we need to understand that a little more clearly. I would also add one other thing. We know from other sugyot that Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika has conversations with Rav Asher, who was perhaps a little junior to him. So if he is having conversations with Rav Asher, and Rav Asher was one of the editors of the Talmud, we can understand how this statement of Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika gets prominence. It's included in the sugya. It's actually a very important statement. But I just want to give you that historical context of the different players so that you see the interconnections between the different figures in the Talmud and understanding how what's going on, or at least the historical context. Okay, let's examine the statement of Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika. By the way, I don't see anybody. I'm assuming that you're still there. I'm looking at a screen with the Talmud. So if somebody just shout out and say, yes, we hear you, that would be great.
We hear you.
I was getting a little concerned. There was a very long pause there. I was getting concerned, but thank you. Okay, so let me explain the statement. So at the superficial level, the statement of Rav Aha is as follows. If you recall, Rabbi Abu said that if there are less than 3 dayanim, en dinehem din. Perhaps you can go back in the map of the sugya to the section where Rabbi Abu says that, because it's important to understand what the issue that Rav Aha Bere de Rav Ika is addressing. If you go back to Roman numeral part 1, capital B, number 1, right? Was that right, actually? No. 1 second. Yeah. Where is it that Rabbi Abu says, En dinehen din? 1 moment, please. Okay, yeah, I was correct, actually, yeah. If you find that, it says, Ilema de la bainan shelosha ve'ha'amar Rabbi Abu, shenaim shedanu dine mamonot ledibre hakol, en dinehem dina. Notice what Rabbi Abu was saying. Rabbi Abu is making a very categoric statement. Ledivre hakol. It is unanimously agreed, meaning among the Hachamim, there is unanimity, that if 2 Dayanim, they adjudicate Dine Mamonot, the adjudication, the judgment is invalid. That's a very, very clear-cut statement of Rabbi Abu, unequivocal, and it's not challenged for many years. It's not challenged for several generations. Now going back to the statement of Rav Aha, Rav Aha ben Yaakov says, actually, no, mideoraita had name kasher. As a matter of biblical law, if you have 1 dayan, it's kosher, meaning the adjudication is, I don't like the word kosher, it's a valid adjudication. That's what he says, had name kasher. Now, so let's just understand this. When Rav Aha ben Yaakov is adding this detail, it's not clear that he's coming to disagree with Rabbi Abu, because all Rabbi Abu says is en dinehem din. He's saying the adjudication is invalid. But when he says the adjudication is invalid, he's talking from a perspective of rabbinic law. As a matter of rabbinic law, we do not recognize a judgment that was conducted with less than 3 dayanim. Whereas Rav Aha ben Yaakov is making the statement mideoraita hadna mekasher. So this is a statement that needs to be further examined, okay? Because what is his position? What is his position in the event that there is a single dayan who adjudicates? Is he going to say that also midirabanan, the adjudication is valid? So that, let's suspend that, because that's a question and we have to understand it. But as you know, we're first going to examine the historical reason why the Hachamim, if indeed from the perspective of the Torah you could have 1 dayan, why did the Hachamim require 3 dayanim? And that's part B of the sugya. So part A is we have the statement of Rav Aha ben Yaakov, which we still have to examine further. Part B is the policy consideration behind why, if from the Torah, 1 dayan is sufficient, why we have 3 dayanim. Ela mishum yosheve keranot. It's important to understand Hebrew well. So here, keren, in the Torah, you have the word keren, of course, to describe the horn of an animal, as the shofar, for example. But also the word keren is karnot hamizbeach. So karnot hamizbeach refers to the corners, to the extremities of the mizbeach. So when we're talking about yosheve keranot, we mean people who reside at the extremities, meaning we have the Jewish community, and then we have Jews who live far away from the community. Rabbeinu Hananel, he uses the word yosheve midbarot. By midbar, he doesn't mean necessarily the Sahara Desert or other regions in North Africa, but rather he means places that are desolate. Desolate in what sense? So it's just part of the Hebrew language and the prose of the Chachamim. So by midbar we mean a place that's desolate from Torah. So a place can be it could be a very lush place with grass and rivers, but it's considered in midbar in the sense that it's a place outside the Jewish community, and you don't have Talmidei Chachamim there, and there is no Torah, or Torah is dirt. It's not as available as in other places. So that's what the word yosheve keranot means. So now that we understand the word, let's understand the idea. The idea is that there are Jewish people living outside the community. These people engage in business and oftentimes have disputes. And if one of these people has a dispute with this fellow Jew, and they want to have an adjudication, the adjudication should take place in the presence of three judges, because in the presence of three judges, you would have an abundance of Torah. It's three people as opposed to one person. So if we follow the biblical law, you choose one person. That one person in a desolate place is no doubt an An Ha'aretz. But if you have three people, there's going to be an abundance of Torah. There will be more Torah. And as a result, and because of that consideration, the Hachamim said, let's always have these disputes adjudicated with three people. Yosheveh Keranot. That's part B of the sugya. So now we have the statement of Ravaha, we have the policy consideration. We still don't know whether what Ravaha said was a matter of rabbinic law as well. We still don't know that. And we still have some challenges to Ravaha. So we're going to have three challenges to Ravaha. Challenge, and as you know, we said several times, this is sugya meshuleshet, so it's not surprising that we would have three challenges to Ravaha. Exactly. So let's start with the first challenge. Challenge number one. Okay, and here we go. Tu bitlata mi lahavu yosheveh keranot. So challenge number one is, let's consider this matter. Come now. If you have three judges, do we not still have the issue of there being a lack of Torah knowledge, and inability to adjudicate this dispute properly? I mean, it's still a desolate place. Nothing changed. Why does having three Amei Ha'aretz, I know that in math, 1 + 1 + 1 equals 3, but if you have, let's say, three Burim who know nothing about Torah, 1 + 1 + 1 still equals 0. So that's the basic premise of the Gemara. If we have three people who are not knowledgeable in Torah, do we not still have burut, and therefore, unfortunately, a bad adjudication of this dispute, or an improper adjudication of the dispute? And the Gemara says, that even in the most desolate Jewish communities, you will always find somebody who is gamir. My father, in his Golden Doves, he discusses the difference between gamir and savir. Gamir was the lowest level of learning. It referred to a person who was aware of and fluent in the various rabbinic formulations. So these rabbinic formulations are called halakha. So a person who is fluent in the halachot, for example, he can open up the Mishneh Torah, he knows what the Mishneh Torah says, he's gamir, right? There could be gamir b'chol Torah kulai, there could be gamir, a person who has fluency in all of the Torah, but at the lowest level, that's called gamir. And the premise of Ravaha, the premise of this statement is that if you're going to have three people adjudicating a case, there is it is likely that one of the people that's chosen will end up being a person who has the minimal knowledge of the halachot, and therefore the adjudication would be a more proper adjudication. So that's the first challenge to Ravaha. So again, the policy consideration is yes, 3 burim equals 0 knowledge of Torah. That's correct, but we're hoping that if you're going to already choose a tribunal, one of the people that's chosen will be a Talmid Chacham who has some knowledge, at least, of the halachot, and therefore has the ability to bring the adjudication into a valid conclusion. Let's look at challenge number 2. Ela me'ata ta'u lo yeshalmu. So then the question is as follows, and we dealt with this last week. Namely, we dealt with the issue of a person who is not qualified to be a judge. If that person indeed acts as a judge and adjudicates a case, he has personal liability for his errors, right? And the question here is, perhaps we should say that since we are aware that we are going to be bringing judges to this adjudication who are not qualified, Perhaps, therefore, we should lower their liability as judges. Perhaps, therefore, we should say, well, in this case, since it's Yosheveh Keranot, there should be no personal liability for errors in adjudication. And the Gemara says, au contraire, Kol sheken dinafishe Yosheveh Keranot. This is not the case, because we want to make sure that if anything, they have three judges, and the three judges are willing to come forward and are willing to indeed act as judges. And again, the hope being that one of the judges himself will be Gamir. So we do want them to have liability. We do want them to be personally liable, so that the three judges that come up are actually qualified. Again, I'm thinking that I didn't phrase that well, so let me rephrase that. If we were to say, oh, there's no personal liability, then we're increasing the likelihood that the nefishe Yosheveh Keranot, you're increasing the likelihood that there will be more Yosheveh Keranot, meaning burim, adjudicating this dispute. So we don't want that. We would prefer to encourage the Talmidei Chachamim, perhaps from another city, perhaps from somewhere else, to come and adjudicate the dispute. And of course, a bur is less likely to adjudicate the dispute if he knows that there's personal liability for errors. So that's why, yes, the law of personal liability, that rule that imposes personal liability upon a non-qualified judge, stays in place, because we want to encourage qualified judges to step up and adjudicate the action. And finally, challenge number 3. And this last question, it really explains what the Ravaha statement is about, because we really don't fully understand it yet. I don't like the word challenge. I'm going to revise that word, challenge. It's not challenge number 3. I would say this is question number 3 or issue number 3, because it's not a challenge. We're not challenging in number 3 here. We're not challenging Ravaha. I'm actually going to change it here on my page. I can't change it on yours, but I'm just letting you know that change is taking place. Issue number 3. So this is an interesting question. And perhaps I'm going to invite one of you to help me here. What is the difference in position between Rabbi and Ravaha bered Rabika? This is a difficult question. Who said there's a difference in position? Why are we assuming that there is a difference in position between the two, right? That's an important question. Does anybody wish to chime in as to what the Gemara is? Because ma'ika, why are you making that assumption? Why should there be a position? Didn't we say that Ravaha is talking from the perspective of biblical law? Perhaps he fully agrees with, for example, Rabbi Abu, who said that Shinaim Shidanu and Dinihem Din. You understand? So it seems almost like we're trying to contrive a dispute here. Any thoughts? Anybody want to make a suggestion? I'm not going to call in people's names, although the names appear here, but that would be mean. I would not do that.
Could it be that
Perhaps we have a situation where if a judgment was made in B'diavad, by one judge, B'diavad, because it was okay according to Torah law, we would abide by it, but lechatchila, we wouldn't encourage that, or there might be some differences in some boundary conditions.
Okay, so first of all, I assume your name is Robert. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for stepping up and for participating. There must be some reason. Some a priori reason why the Gemara assumes a contradiction. They say, "My ika ben." What is the difference between those words? Have a reason for them, right? And they're not so much, inside the flow of the discussion. There's nothing in the flow of the discussion that would necessitate that assumption. So there is something in the wording.
Could it be?
And I'll tell you what it is. I'm sorry?
Ravacha Breder Ika Amar.
Who's that?
Avi.
Very nice. Exactly. But it says now when Rabbeina, when Rabbeina, when they edited the text. Now also when the statement of Ravacha Bered Ravika is formulated and it enters the records of the yeshiva, in this case Yeshivat Pombedita, it's formulated as Ravacha Bered Ravika Amar. Now, when it says Ravacha Bered Ravika Amar, it means I disagree with the aforementioned, right? And it was formulated as a challenge to Rava. So we know that he's disagreeing with Rava. There is a disagreement with Rava. Otherwise, they would have formulated it as Amar Ravacha Bered Ravika. And they could have done that, but if the text would have just said Amar Ravacha Bered Ravika Mideoraita Hadna Kasher, we would be reading this Gemara and saying, great, okay, so thank you for the clarification. Now we understand that as a matter of biblical law, indeed, or one dayan is kasher. As a matter of rabbinic law, you need 3 dayanim, and the reason you need 3 dayanim is for the policy considerations discussed previously, but it doesn't say that. It says Ravacha Bered Ravika Amar. So we know that there's a disagreement between Ravacha and Rava. That's really important. So let me continue. So I'm going to read that again. You see how every word in the Gemara has meaning, and it's not just, I don't mean to say this in a disrespectful way, but what I'm trying to say is that, it's important to assume that the Chachamim weren't rambling. You know what I'm saying? And the Chachamim were very precise in the way they spoke and the way they formulated their statements. And they took language incredibly seriously because we're not used to that. We're not used to that level of linguistic sophistication. It often seems like, surprising to many people that every single word in the text is rich with meaning. But that was part of Jewish thinking. And my father writes about this in the horizontal society. The whole premise of the horizontal society is alphabetic thinking. We always thought in terms of words and speech and letters, and every letter and every word was meaningful. So it's a different type of thinking for us. When I say we shouldn't assume that the Chachamim were rambling, what I'm actually trying to say is that we often do that ourselves. But that's just part of the Western world where there is less of an emphasis on rhetoric and language and more of an emphasis on, well, what is he really saying? What's the idea here, right? And once you know the idea, the language is less important. So I'm reading that again. Ma'ika ben Rabba, de Rabba Bered Ravika, Ika benaihu, Dishmuel, ud Rabbi Avu. The disagreement between Ravaha and Ravika, between Rava, and Ravaha is the same difference or the same dispute that you would find between Shemuel and Rabbi Abu. Ika benaihu, di Shmuel ud Rabbi Abu, de amar Shemuel. Oh, you don't have that right. So if you look at the standard text, the words di Shmuel ud Rabbi Abu, which here you see are capitalized, are not in the standard text. It doesn't change the meaning greatly, but it does serve to clarify. Ika benaihu, di Shmuel ud Rabbi Abu. Right? I think it's more elegant in the way it's phrased. De amar Shemuel, shenaim shedanu, dinehem din, ella shenikreu vet din hasuv. As Shemuel says, if the judges adjudicate a dispute, the judgment is valid. It has legal standing, meaning the litigants must comply with the instructions of the judges, but this is a betin hasuf. This is arrogant judges, right? They have a lot. They're audacious for just sitting down, the two of them together, and not bringing a third person to join them in this adjudication. But okay, that's a moral, meaning there's a moral problem with the dayanim. We can, other hachamim perhaps can rebuke them, but as far as the adjudication, it has a legal standing of law. It was properly done. And it's fine. So again, the Amar Shemuel, Shenaim Shedanu, Dinehem Din. Ella Shenikreu Vetin Hasuf LeRabba. If we consider the position of Rava, let le Dishmuel, Rava does not does not abide by the statement of Shemuel. According to Rabbi, he does abide by the statement of Shemuel. So what does that mean? So now we got a little more clarity. What that means is that when Rabbi made his statement that mideoraita hadna mekasher, right? It means that if you have an adjudication which has less than 3 people, well, okay, so this, okay, well, let me ask another question. Okay, let me ask another question. Mideoraita hadna mekasher. Does Rabbi Abhu agree with that? Mideoraita hadna mekasher. So that's an interesting question. Well, if you look at Rabbi Avu's original statement, it's not clear because Rabbi Avu in his original statement is Shinaim Shedanu and Dinehem Din. The din is not a din, meaning it's invalid. But why is it invalid? You understand my question? Is it invalid as a matter of biblical law? Is it invalid as a matter of, well, of course it's invalid as a matter of rabbinic law. But do we say that somehow this has legal standing deoraita? It's an important question, and it's going to tell you something as to how the legal system works. Let me give you the following. Let me give you. There's 2 keys here to understanding this discussion, and let me provide you the 2 keys. Okay, the first key is as follows, and I think this is related to a question that somebody asked previously in one of the previous classes, or maybe he posted it on the side and I never addressed it. Do the Chachamim have the authority to abrogate the Oraita laws? That's a good question. Can the Chachamim abrogate a din de Oraita? So I would like to say the following. There are actually 3 cases. This is the Meiri in the first chapter of Masekhet Megillah. I think he says it. Excuse me. It was the Meiri in the first chapter of Masekhet Yevamot. I think he says it best. And it's the following 3 cases. Number 1, the Chachamim have a right to abrogate a misvat aseh deoraita b'shev ve'al ta'aseh in order to prevent a potential violation of a misvat lo ta'aseh deoraita. So the classic example would be shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Should we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah shechaliot b'Shabbat? It's a misvat aseh deoraita. And the answer is, well, yeah, of course, because the misvat of blowing the shofar is misvat aseh deoraita. And the isur of blowing a shofar on Shabbat is a shevut, and it's even less than a shevut. The Gemara says in the first chapter of Masekhet Shabbat that chokhmahi ve'ena melacha. It's not even a melacha. It's not even karov le'melacha. It's just kind of it's a type of thing that takes some skill. So chokhmahi ve'ena melacha. According to the standard rules of jurisprudence, we should blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. The same way that according to the standard rules of jurisprudence, why not make Netilat Lulav on Sukkot, Shechaliot b'Shabbat, right? What's there? There's nothing there. So the Chachamim have the right to abrogate a Misvat Aseh Deoraita in order to prevent the potential violation of Misvat Lo Ta'aseh. In this case, the Misvat Lo Ta'aseh is Shemei Taltelena Arba Amot B'Rshut Harabim, right? So you're probably familiar with that law. I'm not going to elaborate on that particular law. So that's case number 1. Case number 1 is to annul, or not to annul, to suspend the Misvat Aseh in order to protect the Misvat Lo Ta'aseh. There is, and by the way, this is important as long as we're talking about shofar. The same thing with Megillah. The reason you don't read the Megillah on Shabbat is for the same reason. Shemei Taltelena Arba Amot. I really have to add this. I mean, I'm going to take this opportunity to be mean, and I'm sorry if this ruins somebody's. Purim. I don't mean to do that. I want everybody to be happy and to enjoy themselves. But a good example would be, can a man dress up on Purim in women's clothing, as is commonly, I used to see this a lot, unfortunately, in Israel, and people were very surprised when I announced in the synagogue that actually this is Yisur Deoraita, Lo Yilbash Gever Simlat Isha, and said, no, but it's for the mitzvah of dressing up on Purim. That's a non-existent mitzvah, of course. There's no mitzvah to dress up for him, and everybody does what they want to do, and I'm okay with that. But it's not a mitzvah. But even if it was a mitzvah, we cannot be ovrim, we cannot be what do you call it? Violent misvat lo ta'aseh de'oraita lo yilbash gever simlat isha. Right? So that's important. So there are no circumstances where we can just decide that we don't want to abide by mitzvot lo ta'aseh de'oraita. I want to get to the third category that the Meiri brings. That's what's relevant to our discussion. The third category is that the Hachamim have a right to be mafkirim the mammon of a person. Mishum hefker bet din hefker. So the bet din have authority over property and the definition of property law, and therefore, by extension, who owns what, right? That's summarized in the words hefker bet din hefker. Okay. Now I want you, that's key number one. So key number one is even if the oraita, there was a property belongs to a certain person, and even if the oraita, the rules require that that person be the owner of that property, the betin has a right to be mafkir the property and say no, he doesn't own it. So over matters of property law, the betin has a tremendous latitude in their authority. Okay, that's important. So now let's get back to the question of Rabbi Habere de Ravika and Rabbi. So we said that Rabbi does not agree with the statement of Shemuel. Shemuel says if two people made an adjudication, the adjudication is fine. Rabbi says no, it's not an adjudication. What do you mean it's not an adjudication? Let's say these two Dayanim reached a conclusion, and in the conclusion they said, Reuven, take $100 from your pocket and give it to Shimon. Now comes Rabbi and says, no, I disagree. What do you mean you disagree? If as a matter of deoraita law, it was a betin, and as a betin deoraita, they can tell Reuven, take $100 from your pocket and give it to Shimon. How can Rabbi come and say no? And the answer is, Rabbi is saying, as a matter of rabbinic law, this is not a betin. And because as a matter of rabbinic law, this is not a betin, hefker betin hefker. We can say no. Actually, Reuven keeps the $100, right? And don't tell me, but since the oraita, Reuven has to pay the $100 to Shimon, he should pay the $100 to Shimon. No, because hefker betin hefker. It's a really important point. I hope that I expressed it clearly enough. I don't know if I was clear. So if you want me to repeat this, I can do it, because there's also another key I want to get to, and I see that we're getting closer to the 4:15 hour, 15-minute point. So is that point clear? So let's just summarize it. So you have Rabbi Habere de Ravika. Rabbi Habere de Ravika says the oraita, you can have one person, and the Rabbanan, you can have one person. Okay. Rava doesn't disagree. This is so important. He doesn't disagree on the point of the oraita. He agrees. He's saying the Rabbanan, it's not good. I'm gonna demonstrate that soon. He's saying the Rabbanan, it's not good. And the reason we can say the Rabbanan, it's not good, is because of Efker Betin Efker. So therefore, we have the authority to do that. But there's another key to understanding this. In Harambam, in the Hakdamat to Perusha Mishnayot, he said that there were never machlokot among the Chachamim involving matters that we got from Moshe Rabbeinu. So matters that we got from Moshe Rabbeinu, there was never machlokot among the Chachamim. Now, we learned from Rabbi Habere de Ravika that there are cases where you can have one dayan. Besedek tishpot amitecha. Right? He brings up a pasuk and he says mideoraita. Now, how can he say mideoraita? How can he say that? Well, we're going to see soon that Shemuel, and actually we read that. Did we read the statement of Shemuel? Yeah, we did. So we're going to see that Shemuel says that it's fine, that the oraita, the adjudication is valid. So what is the dispute about? The dispute cannot be on the oraita matter, because if the dispute was on the oraita matter, you would have a dispute involving a matter of biblical law, which, where did we receive the Deoraita laws? We received them from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So that cannot possibly be that on the law Deoraita of one Dayan, the Hakamim are having a dispute, right? So therefore, the only way to understand this is as I explained it. How did I explain it? I said nobody disagrees on the point of Midoraita Hadna Kasher. The disagreement is, and what if somebody adjudicates the Oraita, right? What's the status of that, right? We're going to see that it's more than that, because later on the Gemara is going to deal and say, actually, lechatahila, you can also have one dayan. But the yesod hayesodot is one dayan is kasher de oraita. Everybody agrees that the oraita, one dayan is kasher. The disagreement is, and everybody agrees that under situations, you need 3 dayanim and 3 mumchim. For example, in the case of gezelot v'chavalot. But then there are situations, hoda'ot v'halva'ot. And in hoda'ot v'halva'ot, did the Chachamim require 3 dayanim? It's that specific issue. And what happens? And what happens if instead of using 3 dayanim, you use 1 dayan? So that's the crux of the dispute between Rabaha and Rabba, right? And let's just now read the last clause in the Gemara. Ma'ika ben Rabba le Rabaha bere de Ravika, Ika benayu de Shmuel udrubi abhu de Amar Shemuel. Shenayim shedanu dinahem din. If 2 people adjudicated a dispute, dinahem din ela shenikreu betin chasuf. As we said, this is an audacious thing. Le Rabba le de Shmuel, le Rabaha bere de Ravika it le de Shmuel. So Rava, who follows the interpretation of Rabbi Abhu, agrees with Rabbi Abhu, namely that the adjudication is improper. It's an invalid adjudication, notwithstanding that the Oraita, it's proper. The Hachamim say this is an invalid adjudication, and the Hachamim have a right to do so. But here's the question. How can Rabbi Abhu not be aware a second time of the statements of Shemuel? The first time was where Shemuel offered the interpretation of the Mishnah, and based upon the interpretation of Shemuel, the way that Shemuel interpreted the Mishnah Rabbah, we had part 2 of our sugya. And here's second place where the Rabbi Abhu is not aware of what Shemuel said. The Amar Shemuel Shenaim Shedanu Dinehem Din Ela Shenikeu Betin Hasub. Rabbi Abhu said, and Dinehem Din, right? That's strange. And I could only speculate, and that's why it's important to understand the sugya also from a historical perspective. My speculation is as follows. Rabbi Abhu was in Caesarea in the days of the Roman occupation of Caesarea. The Roman government was there, and they were at war with the Persians. And Shemuel was, of course, in Nehar De'ah in Persia. And because Shemuel was in Nehar De'ah in Persia, apparently there was a lack of communication and a lack of exchange of halachot. At this time in history, later on, there was more exchange. We know during Rabbi Yochanan's time there was more. We know that there were people who traveled, but there was this vacuum. And we see it. We see 2 cases where there was a vacuum. Rabbi Abhu was unaware of what Shemuel said. And that's the premise of this sugya. Now, I want to read to you the Perush HaMishnayot. If you give me a moment, it's unfortunately, just give me a moment. It's not here. It'll take me approximately a minute, so I apologize for this delay. Okay, I am back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen with you. So Avi, I will send you now. let me just do this way. It's not the highest quality, but I think it will be sufficient for our purposes. Okay, so Avi, if you would be so kind as to look at your WhatsApp and the photo that I just shared with you, do you have the ability to share that with the rest? Or I can share it actually from my end if it's easier. You're muted, so I can't hear you.
I should be able to, if you give me.
Okay, I'll try to do it before you. Let's see who does it first. I'm gonna download it, open. Okay, I think I can do this now on my end. So I'm gonna save you the.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Okay, I want to read to you now Lishon Harambam. Okay, and you see, by the way, now you understand what a sugya is. You see how every part of the sugya has a very specific function, a very specific role. Everything is clear. I mean, at this point, it's just a question of getting the information organized in your mind. That's why we have the structure. But I think the sugya is so clear, it's almost delicious. That's why I love studying Gemara so much, because it really is a pleasure. Okay, so you all see the Lishon Harambam, right? Good. Dine Mamonot. Look what Harambam says. Mikelalam hagezelot v'havalot. Belisafek. Of course, included in the word Dine Mamonot is gezelot v'havalot. But the very next word in the Mishnah is gezelot v'havalot b'shlosha. So why say it? You see how Harambam is mirroring the exact discussion, exact question that our Gemara brought. You see? Right? You know, word for word. Literally, you see, it's a reformulation of the Gemara. Ela shekol dine mamonot chus migezerot v'havalot mutar sheyadunu bahem shelosha she'enam mumchim. Here, Harambam offers precisely the explanation of Rabbi that gezerot v'havalot are different than the rest of dine mamonot. Gezelot v'chavalot require mumchim, but the rest of dine mamonot do not require mumchim. You remember the statement of Rabbi, dine mamonot b'shlosha idiotot, right? And then gezelot v'chavalot b'shlosha mumchim. Remember that? This in the sugya that we study. This follows exactly the girsah that I brought to your attention perfectly. So you see that Rambam follows the older Gersot, which, well, I mean, I don't think that should be particularly surprising to anybody. Okay. So in the case of Dinei Mamonot, other than Gezerot v'Chavalot, meaning Hodaot v'Halvaot, you don't require mumchim. And now he goes, Ve'ehad im haya mumche larabim. Also, you can have a single dayan if the dayan is a mumche larabim. What is mumche larabim? And this is going to be a subject that's dealt with in further sugyot. But here you see that the idea of Shelaim Shedanu and Dinahem Din, as expressed by Rabbi Abhu, is rejected in favor of Shemuel and in favor of Rabbi Chabere de Rabika. And here you see the contribution of Rabbi Chabere de Rabika to our discussion. ואחד אם היה מומחה לרבים, הוא יישא בעניין מומחה לרבים, שכיוון התפרסם אצל הרבים למדנותו ומעלתו בחוכמה, כפי שידעו את זה החכמים שבחנוהו וקיימו את פסקי דינו, מומחה לרבים doesn't mean that there's a democratic election and everybody comes to elect vote for judges. Larabim means he's known in the public as a wise man because the hachamim have validated his knowledge, right? That's really important, right? Right. But in the case of Gezelot v'Chavalot, you do need 3 expert judges. And that's why you have Dinei Mamonot b'shlosha. That's part 1. Gezelot v'Chavalot b'shlosha. There's a split between the 2, right? Exactly, literally, like I explained it if you listen to the previous recording, in the question against Rava and how Rava answers it. Okay, that's it. That's what I want to bring to your attention. I see that it's 4:25, so actually we have 5 minutes for questions, which is exactly the way I was planning this. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to address them. And again, I just want to address I think somebody asked me on the Discord, that chat, Discord. Somebody asked me, he offered an explanation of the Vilna Shas, and yeah, it does have an explanation. I don't mean to discount that. go ahead. If there's any questions, I'm happy to address them now.
Maybe Robert, you want to ask last week's question?
So my last week's question was answered. Well, partially. It was answered that the Rav said that there are certain. Well, we have shava. We can override an assay, but not a lot assay. He said. I haven't thought through how that reflects to our sugya, but I was going to ask a slightly different question, which was the concept of hefker bet din hefker. Is that a deraita concept, a Rabbanan concept, and does it matter?
I mean, first, that's an excellent question. I like especially the last part. It doesn't matter. Who's asking this question right now? If I may ask.
Robert again.
Robert. Okay, thank you, Robert. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's an excellent question. Does it matter? And I would have to say that the authority given to the Bet Din by the Torah is to define property law and property rights, right? So that's really important. Yeah, the Torah gives them that authority. So the authority of the Bet Din is to gezerot, takanot, dinim muflaim, to transmit the laws received by Moshe Rabbeinu, but also to define property law.
What's the source of that, though? Why do they have that right to?
So we have to. We would have to study the. We would have to study the appropriate sugyot in the Gemara and see, the development of that law. I think what's important here in this case is just the idea, again, that Harambam says there can be no dispute on things we receive from Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, I would have to say that the law of one dayan in the case of Oda'ot v'halva'ot, or in the case of some dinei mamonot, it has to be something that was received from Moshe Rabbeinu. Otherwise, how can you say mideoraita? And it fits in so perfectly with the concept that the machloket is, well, what happens if, right? And that's why we need the law of hefker, or the principle of hefker bet din hefker. Another question that was asked last week, I have something in the back of my head. I remember, yeah. Why does it say dinei mamonot b'shlosha? It says hoda'ot v'halva'ot b'shlosha, gezerot v'chavalot b'shlosha. That was a question. I'm just thinking out loud. And again, the formulation dinei mamonot, you see it later on. I think it's in chapter 3 or 4. Again, it says dinei mamonot b'shlosha. Ze boreh lo echad, ze boreh lo echad, Hashem boreh li me'od echad. That's the Mishnah. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh always uses formulations that are common. He always prefers to use the common formulations, because again, so I'm studying at Baal Peh. As you can see, I actually know about Baal Peh. This wasn't prepared as a trick for this for this class, but rather, right? So I know dinei mamonot b'shlosha, and then it repeats later on dinei mamonot b'shlosha, right? So that was the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh formulated the Mishnah. He preferred common usage terminology at the even though it's less precise, than to use the more precise terminology. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so next week's sugya is a very short sugya. It has to do with textuality, and it shows you how ideas were organized in the Mishnayot, right? And it's very counterintuitive. What we're going to be reading next week is kind of counterintuitive, but it is interesting. It takes us deeper into rabbinic thinking. And under the assumption that there are no more questions, if there are, you can raise your hands or chime in. Under the assumption, therefore, apparently conclusion that there are no more questions, I'm going to wish you all a lovely evening wherever you are in your respective locations.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we look forward to next Monday. We'll continue. Are we carrying on the next sugya?
Yes, the very next sugya. All right.